George Karseras is a chartered occupational psychologist and chartered sports psychologist, founder of the Team Up company, which is a UK-based management consulting firm. And he's also the author of Build Better Teams, Creating Winning Teams in the Digital Age, which is his most recent book. I believe it hasn't actually come out in the UK yet, so I think it's imminently ready. He is a thought leader and specialist in how to build teams, and his track record, as well as being a management consultant, and indeed he was a principal consultant at KPMG Consulting, is that he has advised and coached all sorts of teams, both in the commercial world and the sporting world. Shan't waste any of his time by trying to enumerate all of those, but he really does have a great track record as a thought leader in teams. So, George, are you ready to go?
Super. Okay. Well, thanks very much for the introduction, and always nice to be considered a thought leader. And I was wondering if you might have a chat with my children and my wife as well, because it'd be nice if they thought the same thing, as highly of me as you do. But that's one of the challenges of parenting, right? The most important team we have is our family, I suppose. So look, I'm very pleased to be here. I don't want this to be a lecture. I know you're expecting some leadership and some know-how, and I'm very happy and delighted to be sharing with you what I can contribute. I don't want this to be you feel like you're being talked at. Those of you who are has the sort of the interest in this area who are tuning in. So please, my request at the start of this is, if as I'm presenting my material, you have a question, something's not quite clear, maybe the language isn't so, if English isn't your native language, or something you're not quite sure about, then just try and make this as if we are in the room together. And so you can ask a question. Simon is kindly going to be my ears and my eyes, because I can't see the chat when I'm in presentation mode. So so if there's a question that's relevant to the slide and the topic that we're going through, then please put that in. And then at the end, if we have time, hopefully I'll make sure there's time. There can be general questions about the topic, which we can then discuss at the end. So I hope that's okay. And I'd start, if I can, by asking you to put into the chat, just kind of get this interactive flow going. Okay, so the first question then is to put into the chat in your history of work. I know some of you will be quite experienced, others you may just started your careers, I don't know, but the question is, what team have you worked in where the stakes have been at their highest? So what team have you worked in where the stakes have been at their highest? You will see from the presentation, I do have some experience of extreme teaming and teams that work under extreme, so where definition of an extreme team is where lives are at stake, right? Either they're in the team or as a result of the team working. And I'm calling now from Glasgow, and I'm just on a day with the coaches here at Glasgow Rugby Club, which is a professional rugby club. And I suppose that's a fairly physical, rugby is a very physical sport. So if the team is not working well and somebody gives a bad pass to somebody in a situation, that could be very dangerous, right? So that's kind of where the stakes are quite high. There can be life-threatening injuries in rugby, a very physical sport. So that's an example. But anyway, so I'll give you a few seconds just to put into the chat any teams where you have been, where you've had the stakes have been at the highest. And maybe, Simon, when you get those through, you can read those out and see what kind of crazy things people have been doing, through their lives and careers. Being a member of an architect, being a chief architect doesn't count, by the way. Being a developer, coding developer, that doesn't count. Scrum Master, that doesn't count, because that's not really. But anyway, what have we got?
Okay, we have somebody who did maritime search and rescue. Sounds good. Very, very interesting. Yeah. Somebody apparently did a very dangerous ERP implementation.
Yeah, we've been there. ERP, very vicious sport. That, yeah.
To be fair though, it did involve restructuring and people being at risk. So therefore, people.
Oh well, no, lives, absolutely lives. No, I'm being facetious. Now we're talking lives are at stake. Well, livelihoods are at stake in that situation. Yes, absolutely.
Jason has done safety systems for nuclear reactors. That sounds pretty scary.
Wow. Yeah. Gosh, Jason, that is a big consequence if that doesn't go well, right? So.
And Neil has been making sure the police's IT systems work, which I guess is pretty crucial as well.
Absolutely. No,
someone rescued a failed hospital voice over IP telephone system, so I've kept the hospital running, I guess.
Yeah.
Someone has been jumping out of aircraft. For Queen and Country.
For Queen and Country. Okay, so we've got a military, someone from the military, maybe a paratrooper or someone. So that's military is as extreme as it gets, right? Lives are at stake there, so that's pretty tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody here, Al, was in the military in Northern Ireland, Iraq, Bosnia, and Afghanistan. So that's definitely my definition of dangerous.
No, absolutely. Okay, well, that's a little bit of a warm up just to sort of see. We'll talk a little bit about a story I'm going to tell about a kind of an extreme situation and others as well. But thanks for those initial contributions. And if we just move forward through the pack, and I should probably start by giving a little bit of a background to who I am and my interest in the area. So as Simon said, I come from sports originally, so I say that tentatively because I'm essentially a failed professional tennis player. I use the word professional reservedly. I think my career earnings were £37.50, which doesn't exactly put me into the major professional ranks. I think I was the best tennis player on my street on my day. But the point is, I did go for professional sport, and if I couldn't be a professional sports person, I wanted to run my own business. And then I got into psychology because like a lot of failed sports people, or people who didn't quite make it, shall we say, I wanted the next best thing, which was to work with people who were professional sports people to help them make it. So I trained as a sports psychologist, and I kind of came into it quite late. And I joined a small consultancy, and that consultancy was the first ever sports psychology consultancy in the UK. Worked with Tottenham Hotspur, and they did business psychology, and they were groundbreakers. And I was trained in team development from a fairly early age, I suppose, in my career, to work with elite athletes and teams. And so that interest then has really galvanized my focus and passion. And for 25 years, since 1997, I've been predominantly working as a consultant in the team development space. So as Simon has said, my interest, my passion is teams, not leadership, but teams. And I see leaders as enablers of team performance rather than as teams as enablers of leadership performance. And that's an important distinction I make, because a lot of the stuff we get given in the field of organizational development seems to put the individual at the heart of change or of performance. And I've always felt that the individual, the leader, is a part player, and the team is really the most important element. So I have a real passion for teaming, and more recently, in the last sort of 5 years, I've been researching what the components of a team and measuring how do you measure team effectiveness. And I've developed, I think it's the first ever code that says, in a sequence way, this is how you build a team using all the literature and all the science that is available. And that code has taken the shape of a book, and the book is as Simon said, is out now. It's in America at the moment. It's coming out in the UK in January. I think February we've got supply chain issues, and the book really is a manifestation of my mission, my personal mission, which is to help as many teams as I can to work. I'm getting this pop up here. Just get rid of that. Can you see that? There you to work better in order to improve both well-being and contribution. So well-being is very important to me. Mental health very important to me, and so I want performance and I want well-being, and that's really why I exist. And that's the book there. You are putting a little plug here, I guess. The book is available. You can pre-order it on Amazon. It's endorsed by Amy Edmondson. Say a little bit more about Amy Edmondson, because she's a very important feature and character in the field of team working, because she really brought this phrase psychological safety to bear. And that's a phrase that is now kind of center stage in teaming. So I'm this talk. Simon convinced me to do this talk, and I think I'm happy to do it. And the talk really is the book. I mean, it's a summary of the book, which I'm going to take you through. So I'll start off with the story, if I can, and it relates a little bit to extreme teams. So this is Ed Stafford. I read this book a couple of years ago, and it's quite extraordinary what happened, because in 2008, Ed started this walk with his colleague Luke, and they had this dream. They were mates, very good friends, and had this dream and this vision that they could be the first ever people to walk the entire length of the Amazon from source to to the end of the river, right? And it'd never been done before. And when they sought sponsorship from the National Geographic Society and the British Expedition Societies and various other places, they were told, forget it, it's too dangerous, it's not possible, you're crazy. It's so remote, there's so many imponderables, that you're going to be in the middle of nowhere, and if there's any issues, any problems, you're not going to be able to get out safely. So it's not possible. We don't think it's reasonable. When they actually went to get fixers in South America to help them to kind of, get their passes and various things they had to do in terms of regulations, they were also told, we don't want to get involved in this. We think it's crazy. So it just was seen as being an impossible task. Nevertheless, they embarked on the task themselves. They felt they could do it, and so they cracked on. They faced into the risks. And the risks were huge, right? So you had unknown terrain because of the water's flood, obviously in the rainforest. You have drugs in that part of in Brazil and not that part of South America, Peru, Colombia. That whole area is rife with drug running and gangs and people who wouldn't think twice about putting a gun to your head and killing you if they felt that you were at risk to their business. You had tribes that had never, very hostile tribes that would, and at one point, they were held up at Arrow Point and marched to a camp, and they were told to to prove that they weren't responsible for a missing person that had gone that day, and they were about to be shot. They were they were very hostile tribes, very nervous tribes because of deforestation. And then of course you had the flora and fauna. You had pythons, piranha, bullet ants, jaguar. The list goes on. Disease, and so it was a pretty demanding task. Anyway, they set off together, and that's them starting the trip on 2nd of April 2008, and they made good progress and were together for 3 months, and then things started to go wrong, and so that's Ed on the left and that's Luke on the right. I thought that was quite an interesting photograph, because they got on well, but you can see in that photograph one person is laughing, the other person is not laughing, and that kind of was what was happening a little bit in that relationship. Anyway, I won't go into detail at this stage, but Luke left the expedition after 3 months, and Ed was best mates with Luke, and Ed was going to be Luke's best man at his wedding, and they haven't spoken since, right? So something, it was not a very good experience they had together. They started off as best friends. They left as enemies, I guess. And And their team of porters and they had to have guides, and so the whole thing was a complete car crash in terms of that relationship. And I was thinking that's interesting, because what happened next was that Ed met Daniel Cho Sanchez Rivera, and Cho was one of the porters and so one of the guides that they hired, and he was going to be with them for only 3 days. And he ended up staying for nearly 2 years, right? To walk with Ed for 2 years, and with various porters, various teams, he stayed in duration. So Ed went from a very, very hostile, terrible kind of working team to one that was highly successful. And the book actually uses the story to explain exactly what happened, and I'll give you the summary of what actually happened at the end of this talk, right? Because they worked together, and as I said, 2 years later, 860 days after Ed left, you can see how thin, shattered Ed is at that point. I mean, he was on his last legs. He really was on the verge of collapse. That is quite harrowing how they managed to finish the story. They got to the coast and they ran into the coast together. It was very emotional. And they managed to do it. And then as a result of that, they were seen as absolute, or Ed especially, because he did the walk from the beginning. He won these awards. He's now on, and so Ralph Fiennes, quotes top league of expeditions, incredible achievement, Guinness World Record. And Ed now, as you might know, he's actually on this Discovery Channel. He's done several TV programs, written several books. He's now he's a regular Discovery star, I guess, and a lovely chap as well. And I read the book and I thought that's interesting. And then I interviewed Ed as part of some work that I was doing with Extreme Teams to find out a bit more. And then it struck me that I'm going to put this into my book and base the book, because I'd already pretty much written the book. I rewrote it and I put this front and center because I felt it was such a compelling example of what makes a great team and what makes a team fail, right? And I tested this code that I developed through the story. So anyway, we'll find out later on, after I go through what makes a great team, why the team of Luke and Ed didn't manage to complete their walk, what was wrong with it, and why Cho succeeded. And I think it says quite clearly and helps understand the codes, right, in that sense. So there's a little story to start off with. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the landscape of teaming. And first of all, before we go into the changing landscape, teaming has never been that great in organizations. I mean, these are some well-known, well, I say well-known, they're not well-known at all, actually, but in the field of team development, there are some seminal studies that have been done. Wakeman, all these references, by the way, and there's more references in the book. The book has got 500 or 600 academic references. It's a very scientific approach to teaming. The starting point is that before we even look at the changing landscape of teaming and what IT in particular is doing to teaming in organizations doesn't actually work that well historically. And I give you another example, right? One of my clients is a CEO of a well-known very well-known organization, global CFO, CIO, global CIO, chief IT leader in that organization. And I looked, as part of doing some work with his team, and I said, can I see your leadership 360 so I can understand, how you lead and your impact on the team? And I ran my own diagnostic, which we'll see in a second what that looks like. And his 360 was exemplary. It was brilliant. A's and A minuses and A stars all over the shop. What a great leader. And then I looked at his team diagnostic, and it was C plus, D minus, right? So I thought that's interesting. One level you've got this amazing leader, and another level you've got this pretty damning report on how that team is working. And that kind of summarizes really the fallacy and I think in many ways, the misguided measurement that we place on leadership through 360 rather than the impact of leadership on how their teams are actually working, right? And so anyway, so that's one of the reasons why teams, if we don't really understand how teams work particularly well, we think it's because someone is a visionary doesn't always equate to the fact that the team understands the vision. Two different questions, right? So that's just a starting point, right? But there's a number of things going on, and there's a couple of features of today's organizations, which of course you're right across in terms of being in the middle of the IT world, right? So you know, and I'm sure no one on this call is going to find this strange or mysterious or in any way contentious, right? Digitalization is happening and is everywhere, and it's constant. And this is what the research, the data is telling us. Continuous digital transformations are taking place. Most IT CIOs are forecasting more digitalization, are forecasting if they don't digitally transform, then they're going to go out of business. And so it's non-stop, right? And so part of digitalization and the impact of that is that massive restructuring of organizations taking place. I saw an organization yesterday talking to again, someone funny enough in the IT department. They're going through yet another restructure to deal with the opportunities that cloud digitalized working is producing, and so a huge restructuring. Even industries are being reconfigured, and we can expect more of the same. Big data, machine intelligence, creating job uncertainty, especially blue collar jobs, and different types of roles now requiring more subject matter expertise. So that's that's the landscape as far as digital working is concerned. And what does that mean in terms of what it means in teaming for teams? And again, these are all sort of fact-based, science-based, research-based impacts. I'm not making these up. There's certainly going to be, and there has been, more pressure on mental health to be looked after in teams. Teaming has become more important to generate, to join the dots and work very quickly together to release value, and to release the opportunities across businesses. We have big agile, little agile. So agile working is on the increase, as we know. I'm sure you're all aware of that. But the big buzzword outside of agile, the agile methodology in the manifesto is we want huge agility and adaptability to cope. There's more cross-functional working these days. You're having to be members of several teams. Obviously, not because of COVID anyway. Before COVID, there was more virtual and hybrid working. Well, certainly more virtual working. Now we're moving more hybrid, but that's not changing. It's only been accentuated because of COVID. There's more of a requirement for teams to experiment and try things out, and an absolute requirement for teams to be more distributed. The old command and control autocratic is just not relevant any longer. We have to empower teams. We want teams to learn more and learn together. We have to have resilience, mental toughness to cope with it all. And that's in teams, not just individuals. More requirement, knowledge sharing, and more teams of teams. So you can see the landscape. The teaming was already tough before, or creating good working teams before, in more recent years. All this sort of kicked in, this digital and technology-driven change, and now it's just been up even further. And this thing, teams of teams, I think is worth paying attention to, because the old world 20 years ago, you had these team structures. You still see these on organizational charts, and that's the rhetoric, the brochure, I suppose, on the left-hand side. But the rhetoric is systems of teams, multiple collaborative teams working together, and people in teams, not just going up to the leader in terms of their collaboration and influence, but they're working much more in peer-to-peer relationships, peer-to-peer influencing, and therefore teaming has changed and is changing to create this thing called teams of teams. So So those are two of the pressures, right? Virtual working, looking at the left-hand side, and digital turbulence, two things which are changing the landscape. But there are others, right? Individualism is increasing. It's harder to team now. It's like than it ever has. Narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism. They call these the dark side. We're, as societies, we're becoming more individualistic across the globe. So the whole fame kind of thing. There's all the sort of social mechanisms for measuring individualism are on the increase. Swearing, for example, is a sign of individualism. Would you believe? It's like rebellious. The naming of the names of now the more individual type names, unique names. The old sort of Simon, David, Andrews are being replaced by Moonstrucks and whatever else, other names I can't think of, but strange names that people name their children because they want to be standing out. So this whole thing of individualism, the community spirit's being eroded in towns and villages, and we're moving around a lot more. So individuals on the charge, that makes teaming harder. We've got mounting regulations. We don't go into that too much, but compliance and one hand we want empowerment in digitalization and virtual working. But on the other hand, we have to comply, and the risk and legal compliance is increased massively, and the amount of paperwork has been exponential over the last few years. As we know, we all know now, quite rightly, mental health is so high on the agenda. That's only going to get greater. And as I mentioned already about diversity, you've got multiple team membership, but you've also got now the diversity agenda is clear and front and center. You've got more generational mix. That makes life more complex. Women in business, quite rightly, is increasing, but not enough. We haven't got enough equality in leadership roles, especially. But the gender mix is greater. Ethnicity is mixed much more than it has ever been. So limiting and prejudiced and biased homogeneous teams might be, and they're not particularly high performing, certainly not in more complex teams where creativity is needed. Those are all things that not good, in fact horrendous about homogeneous teams. One thing's for sure, if you're leading a homogeneous team as a team leader, life is more simple, that's for sure. But you throw these things into the mix, and you have to accommodate differences of values, different norms, differences of cultural things. It makes life more complex. So you put all these things together, I'm painting a picture of challenge. And so making sense of all these things is really, I think, more relevant today than it's ever been. And so let's look at virtual working as for instance, these aren't going to be new to you. They're well known. Conflict in virtual teams is much higher. That's just stating the fact of the matter, right? There's more isolation, etc. So virtual teams is also making life more complex. And these are other things now which are relevant in terms of the virtual team that you can take away. These slides will be made available to you. This is a summation of a chapter in my book. I won't read all this out, but these are all things that if you're working in a virtual team, these things help. So you have to have these things now in more than you ever have done. For example, being very clear on what you're doing, being very explicit on what you have done, two things that help teams get clarity in a virtual world. Anyway, I won't go into all these, otherwise it really will turn into a lecture, but these are all things that make life easier in a virtual team. So the question is, and this has got me thinking 5 or 6 years ago, okay, so team working is not great already. You throw in these major challenges, and so what do we do? Where do we go to? And I was thinking, well, this normally storming approach to team working, nearly 70 years old, comes from the late 60s and 70s, and so it's not 70 years old, is it? It's nearly 60 years old. But it's not new, right? And it was in a time when it was, very sort of stable. Things were much more stable and linear. And so, and it's not exactly telling you what to do. It's more describing the stages rather than saying what you do. Right? How do you help? And psychometrics. I mean, that's a if I had a hobby horse to jump onto and have a bash at something, it would be psychometrics. I'm a psychologist, right? So most people in my field, that's what we trade in, and I am qualified in a whole bunch of psychometrics. But frankly, for team working, they serve a very minor purpose in terms of how they help, right? So, and yet we go to them far too often. They can be helpful, but only in a certain small strand of what's required. So they're not really the answer. Consultancies, people like me, well, yes, but if you can afford consultancies, right? And so that's not the answer. That doesn't answer the question. Is hundreds and thousands of teams. So unless you kind of a top team that can have a team coach, we're not the answer, right? So there must be something out there that can help. And so there wasn't. I looked at everything and there wasn't. And I felt, okay, I want to do something about this. I want to do something which is going to be a bit more helpful. So I thought, okay, well, what's needed? Well, what's needed is a roadmap, something that can tell a leader of any team at any level, in any field, in any industry, in any organization, based on sound science, what to do, how do you build a team, and in what order. Okay, that's kind of the challenge. But it has to satisfy a number of criteria, because it's got to be science-based. So me saying what I think is necessary from my experience doesn't cut it. We must respect the science, and we must know we have strong correlates and that the sequence stacks up, right? In a very chaotic emergent system like a team, finding a sequence of what to do is not easy, because most things are interdependent. It has to cover the ground. So there's no point me, science saying, okay, just do these two or three things when there's 15 things to do. I mean, there's a sequence or there's science, but it's only scratching the surface. If I just talk about goals and roles, for example, well, what about trust, and what about how we manage conflict, and what about experimenting? So these things, whatever approach has to be substantial, has to cover the ground. It has to be simple enough to be understood, and not too complicated. Very importantly, it has to be actionable. A lot of the stuff that's out there is academic, and it's not simple and it's not actionable because it's too complicated, and it doesn't affect things that need to be done or are relevant to how a team works, are out of my control. More on that in a second. And I said it has to be universal, has to cover virtual teams, has to cover what's happening in digitalization, has to cover hybrid teams, has to cover senior teams. Today I've been working with a rugby team, as I mentioned, in Glasgow, and professional rugby team, and I was talking to them through the approach. It has to stack up in all teams and be proven to be, right? So this is the kind of like holy grail. I was thinking to myself, is it possible, right? So I'm going to tell a little story about the quest that I went through and what the book was really based on. So we had 5 researchers over 5 years trawling through various search engines and through directly through through meta study, meta analysis, hundreds of thousands of academic journals to look at what are the proven correlates of team performance. I looked at well-referenced books. A well-referenced book is a book that summarizes good science and brings academic journals to the fore. I wanted to read and study books that were proven in science rather than just because a consultant felt it was a good idea. I also spoke to extreme teams as well, because I thought that was quite interesting to understand the applicability of this stuff. It has to be applicable to all teams. And I have an interest in extreme teams. So that was kind of my field. And what I found was a lot of the stuff initially when I was looking at it was really about, okay, so many of the books that have been written and many of the academics especially, quite rightly say, well, to get a team working well, the culture of the business is so important. There's a good culture, so important that top management support team working, and we also know that leadership is so important. It is, very important. I may say that it's not the big thing. It's a huge thing, right? It's not the main thing. The main thing is the team, right? In terms of the pecking order, but the workings of a team is hugely influenced by the leadership, by the team leader. And then you've got resources available, you know, the talents and the team, and not how much access they have to materials and know-how and technology, communication channels, etc. And then I was thinking, well, most of the teams I work with go into an organization. They can't influence these things. The top team maybe, right? But the vast majority of teams, they can't really influence the prevailing culture. The team leader is a team leader, and that's the situation. The resources, they might be able to influence them, but they can't control them. And the talent team, well, you know, that I'm working with a team. I'm not here to tell you who should be in the team, who isn't in the team. It's not my job to do that. I'm here to make the best out of the team. So I was thinking, well, a lot of the stuff that is out there, you know, that's all very interesting, but it's not helpful. Team leaders need more than just, you know, working through this stuff. So what was really, I thought, was more important was looking at what are the controllables that predict great team working. And now we're into opening up a Pandora's box, okay, because there are lots of them. And I, you know, pulled out, every one of these you see on the screen is a predictor of performance. Some way or somehow it's been found to generate performance in the team. So now we're going jeepers creepers, you know, where do you start with this map? Everything is interrelated. So it's just picking out a couple of these. Let's say, you know, positive in humor is it helpful to performance, but if there's no ability of the team to give feedback to each other, and feedback is prevented, then I haven't got that's going to stop me from. I'm not going to be very positive, am I? Right. So those two are related. If there's no strategic alignment about, you know, what we're doing in terms of we all agree on what the strategy is, how am I going to get priorities? So those two are linked. If there's no priorities, if our meetings are rubbish because we don't have as much of them as we'd like to, and they're badly managed, then that may be because you know, the listening isn't there. But we can't adjust that because we can't talk about that because we haven't got feedback. So you can start to see how these things are all. This is why teams are very complex, because a lot of these things, well, virtually all of them actually, are interlinked, right? So so it's a challenging sort of process, right? So the way to work with this is to look at, so what I did was start looking at buckets, predicting categories. And so you could say, okay, get these predictors and you can put them into kind of various categories. So you could say, okay, what are these? Some of these are task related, some of these are people related. Okay, well, you go from 30 predictors to two groups of 15, or one of 15, one of 10, one of 20. Or you can categorize them in terms of other buckets, right? Alignment, adaptability, conflict. You can start putting them into buckets. And that's what a lot of models do, right? They put them into buckets, but they don't tell you in that bucket, those buckets, what's the order of events. And there's too many to remember. And the big thing is there's no sequence, right? Okay, so they're all interesting, good things, but what do you do first? So there was more to this than met the eye, and I was thinking there's a code here somewhere. Or I know there must be a code. I was thinking about, you know, the shortest number for a code in a complex, in any system, is 3. I'm saying, okay, well, it's so complex, let's try and go for 3. And then maybe there's codes within the code, right? So my work with extreme teams led the way here. And the first bucket kind of jumped out at me when I was doing extreme teams. And then I looked at the research and I found some very compelling evidence to suggest this is where we need to start with teams, right? And so if you think about an extreme team, I'm going to ask you a question here so we can break up a little bit here. But the question is, you think about, and I spoke to, this is Dee Caffrey with her yacht. These are available on, you can see some of these interviews on the my YouTube channel on extreme teaming. So Dee is around the world record holding skipper, and what she doesn't know about skippering a yacht isn't worth knowing. And she was doing the Vendée Globe and the and what was called the Volvo Round the World race, very dangerous race in the Southern Oceans, and in that race a crew member died, and they knew the crew member because they were on a ship that they were racing against, and seriously dangerous stuff, right? 40-50 foot waves. And on the right there you've got Andrew Cotty, who's again, I spoke with Andrew. It's on, apparently it's on Sky at the moment. Is stuff around extreme teams on surfing and big wave surfing. So it sounds like an individual sport, but it's not, because that surfer there, Andrew, behind him you can't see is a jet skier. You can't see someone on the shore with pair of binoculars looking out for him, and there's another jet skier there, in case the first jet ski gets mashed by the wave. He surfs 80-foot waves. These are absolutely massive waves. If he gets caught in the wrong wave, as he has done, he can break his back, which he has done, and there's lives have been lost, obviously. And then the bottom one, you've got the London Air Ambulance. And what they have to do very quickly is get together, and they're on a rota system. They're not intact teams. They all kind of jump on the, depending on the shift system. You've got paramedics, you've got surgeons, registrars, and you've got the pilot. So very quickly they got to form this extreme team. So I'm wondering, in the question box there, what is the, what is the most important element in an extreme team, do you think, to have, and where did that come from? So you might want to just jot your answers down on the chat box, and Simon, you might shout out what you think, what comes out there. So so jot down in the chat box what you think are the most important elements to make an extreme team work. What would it be?
Okay, let's read some of these as they come up. We've got trust. We've got the importance of the mission. We've got trust and trust again. Trust featuring very largely. Some other thoughts?
Okay, so
lots of trust.
Okay, now trust. Okay, now it's funny you should say trust. Okay, we need to look at trust, because trust is a big old word, and the trust is made up of several things, right? So trust is made up of two elements. Interpersonal trust is what we call, but usually trust means interpersonal trust, right? It's made up of two elements: cognitive trust and emotional trust. Okay, so cognitive trust basically means it's to do with a task, and it's to do with my perception of your competence, and my perception that you know what you're doing, you're clear on what your plan is, you're clear on your role, and you get what you're doing. There's a little bit of you're a reasonable person thrown in there, you have okay integrity, but essentially it's your ability to do the job. And that's exactly what these extreme teams, they weren't interested so much in emotional trust. Emotional trust is to do with your caring, your benevolence, your support, your empathy, your ability to be a good person to help me on my journey through life. And so in those extreme teams, that emotional trust became far less important. Cognitive trust was the most important thing, right? Because I'm trusting my life in you. Do you know what you're doing? Are you good at it? And do you know what the plan is? And if you've got that, I'm happy, because we can, we'll be fine. The lives will be saved, or my life will be in safe hands, right? So in extreme teams, cognitive trust is more important. Now, we don't work in extreme teams and organizations. However, we have this thing called swift trust, where we have to work quite quickly these days. And as in extreme teams, they form this thing called swift trust very, very quickly, and it's because they have usually have a high disposition for trust. So people in those teams tend to be more trusting than untrusting. They have to be. And also because if I'm working with Simon, supposing you and I, Simon, are doing together, I think you're ex-KPMG, I've been working at KPMG, therefore I know that what kind of people kind of do well in KPMG and how you get in that organization and what the values. I'm going to go, okay, you're a KPMGer, you're a good person on that basis, bigoted and narrow-minded I might be, but you tick a box, right? Or if you're a Navy SEAL, okay, I know you've done 10 months of training to be you've got to be a good person because you're a Navy SEAL. I'm a Navy SEAL. You're a survivor. It's bloody hard to be a Navy SEAL. I trust you because you're a Navy SEAL, right? So we have this thing called reputational trust, and it's your credentials. Before we even meet somebody, we have this swift trust, right? Now, that swift trust before we meet somebody then is translated into what we call full conditional swift trust when we know we're on the same page. Now, so we quickly work out, we know the goals, know the plans. And when I work with teams now, and so the first part of the code is this concept of sharing mental models to build same page trust, right? So sharing mental models sounds like a bit of a dodgy question you might ask in a sauna in King's Cross, but it's not, right? It's a form of similar ways of thinking about things, I suppose, the best way of describing it. So do we understand what the goal is? So do we share that understanding of the goal? Do we understand, we have the same view of what the purpose of our endeavor is, etc., etc., etc. And when we have this thing called same page trust, we building rapidly cognitive based trust, and we build swift trust, right? So the way it works with teams is pre-meet swift trust, then we get same page trust because we can get on the same page, and then we see certain behaviors in place and we get emotional trust, and then what we really want to see is reliability, consistency, and we do all go through that journey and we end up with high levels of interpersonal trust. But the quickest way to build trust is not through benevolence, and the most important way is not through benevolence and kindness, it's through getting on the same page, because it's quite easy to do that. It's just having conversations, right? And so that's the first bucket. And funnily enough, when I looked at the research, it showed quite clearly that getting set seemed to be the biggest predictor of, in other words, getting on the same page with these things. It seemed to lead to a lot of other things. So it's like a root cause, right? So that was kind of like the first bucket. And I call it getting set. And it's all about cognitive trust. And really the three parts of getting set are, do we agree on our mission, which is broadly speaking, the purpose, the vision, the goals? Do we agree on our plans, which is strategy, priorities, roles, responsibilities? And do we agree on our disciplines, which is, do we have the same ways of working? Do we agree on how we're going to run our meetings? And do we have skin in the game? As you can see there, those are all 9 things there. Then those are all pages to get on the same, to be on the same page on, right? All those 9 shared mental models, okay? And every one of those is a predictor of team performance, and I put them all into one box. And when I'm working with a team, that's how I start. And if there's issues anywhere, go here first. All right. We don't start, let's do feedback skills, or let's improve our listening skills, or let's build anything else. Let's just agree what we're doing, who's doing what the vision is. Let's get on that quite quickly. It doesn't take too long, apart from one area, which is a strategy, which can take a bit longer. These are easier things to do, as the extreme teams would prove. Okay. The big 5, very briefly, those are the big 5 that we have in the world in terms of Africa. That's the big 5 where I come from. North Somerset big 5. Very excited when you see a goat in North Somerset, or a deer. But actually the big 5 I want to talk to you about is that in those shared mental models, these are the big 5 for you to be looking at on a regular basis, because you don't just do this and then you're done. Every course of action, I suppose, every decision, or you could actually say, okay, are we clear on why we're doing this? Are we clear on what we're trying to get from this? Are we clear on how we're going to do this? Are we clear on what you're doing, what I'm not doing, and what I'm doing? And are we clear when we're going to actually discuss how we're getting on? These are repeatable clarifications, okay? And so we don't just get set and then that's it. We have to keep resetting. And so we constantly need to be on the same page. But we start the team development journey with these 5, if that makes sense. The second bucket, we move to something now which is much more cutting edge, which is psychological safety, which is a big term I use, which has been brought to us. And this is from the work of Amy Edmondson. And this is really where a lot of current research has shown this to be so powerful, right? So are we free to speak up? Now, that sounds quite simple, right? But however, what's really interesting is that teams that have high levels of psychological safety have a and an amazing amount of a load of predictive outcomes come out the back of that. Right now, what is psychological safety? This is to understand a bit more. These are all signs of poor safety. We'll keep things to ourselves. I'll let you just have a quick glance of those things there. I'm sure you all would have seen these in your teams over the years. These are all proven manifestations of low levels of psychological safety. Okay, now that's the problem, right? How do you solve the problem, right? Well, first of all, you need to recognize the power, right? Now, a lot of the drivers of performance of teams actually have at their origin, not just are we on the same page, they also have this thing called psychological safety. So we all want trust. We don't want much conflict. We have to be able to experiment, innovate. We have to be able to work together, collaborate. Collaboration includes, by the way, giving constructive feedback, having tough conversations, influencing. There's a lot of stuff in collaboration. And we have to be able to learn and adapt. As we know from this whole digitalization and virtual working, we have to be adaptive. We have to learn and move quickly. Right now, what's interesting is that psychological safety is a predictor of all these things. So it's a root cause, right? So there's a second bucket there, right? The big thing with psychological safety is that it allows the team to learn. That's the big thing about safety. The biggest thing, all the performance comes out of this learning box. And the other thing, which is less known, which is my contribution to the field, is one of the reasons I'm pretty sure that Amy Edmondson and Edgar Schein, who kind of is the cultural guru, both endorsed my book, is because I brought something new to the table, which is don't start with psychological safety, start with same page trust. And the research shows, if we look at it, and I did, that same page trust turbo boosts psychological safety. Back to the extreme teams that are on the same page are more likely to build psychological safety than those that are not. Okay, so that's the root. So how do you build psychological safety? Well, that's the code, right? So there's all these different things. I put all those on the left-hand side and the right-hand side into 3 boxes, and they are vulnerability, empathy, and learning. So the best teams, the second bucket has 3 sub-buckets, and we did some regression analysis on this. And so teams that are more vulnerable, funnily enough, are then more empathic, and teams that are more empathic are more able to learn, right? And we know learning is the key thing, right? So how do you be vulnerable? This is what the research says. You do all those things. How are you empathic? You do all those things. So those are 3 things. Those are the next part of the code, okay, which is getting safe. And that's about emotional trust, psychological safety, great dialogue, and the 3 areas: vulnerability, empathy, and learning conversations. And that's the questions that I ask teams and we work on to get safe. All right. So we've got 2 of the buckets. Now the third bucket's actually quite easy, because the third bucket drops out directly from the second bucket. And it has to also have, the science also has to show quite clearly that they're correlates of the first bucket. And also we know that the third bucket, I don't want more than 3, because it's not going to be possible really to get more than 3 in a very complex code. It has to be the most predictable results. It must be nearest to the actual benefits of working in a team. And it also has to extend, because the whole kind of thing we have these days in current teams is one of extension, stretch, challenge. And so the third bucket has to have some kind of, we're moving out of our comfort zones in order to be relevant to today's and tomorrow's teams in ways that previous team models didn't. Okay, so those are kind of the third bucket. And so really we go back to the psychological safety, and those things appear in that third bucket. Now, something on this here, I'm going to ask a question to the group. Looks like a horribly complex. It's not that complex. What can I ask those of you who are still awake? You haven't just put yourself on snooze or something. I understand if you did, because I'm probably talking too much. But if you are still breathing, can you just help summarize, or what do you see here? What message do you think I'm giving in this slide here? It's kind of an important slide for teams, right? So, Simon, can you be in my ears again, please? As people kind of look at that and go, what the hell is that pie chart all about? If you look carefully, you might come up with some messages that I'm trying to say here. What would they be? And if I don't get anybody chipping in here, I know you're all asleep. That really would worry me.
There's an observation from Jason that culture is one of the keys.
Yeah, culture is massive. I'm not poo-pooing culture. The culture is huge, right? However, it's outside the control, so that's why it's kind of, it influences such a lot, but it's not one of the, yeah. And what else?
That they are pointing to your 3 buckets. That you need a mix of team enablers and internal enablers.
I don't need a mix. They are enablers. That's the reality, right? That the reality is that to have a high performing team, you have things that are in the team, like, is the team on the same page? Is it safe? And you'll see now in a second, is it strong? The culture has to be important. Culture is relevant to that, the organizational culture. But also in that third bucket, you can't get away from the fact you need characteristics within the team members themselves, more so in that third bucket than the first 2 buckets, right?
So
you have to have courage and you have to have talent. Go on.
So a number of other observations now. The qualities of the team leader, the varied team members, talent and courage of individuals. Inherent courage and talent are separate. Clear goals, safety and basic talents and courage lead to the manifestation of a high-performing team.
All correct. Well done. I'm pleased to see that you're all still with me. I can't see that, but your answers tell me that you are. And certainly Simon is anyway, because you're doing the work there, Simon. So you being coherent at this stage is a marvelous sign, actually. Okay, so yes, all correct. Now, talent is more important than this third bucket, because you're asking team members to move out of the comfort zone, and that third bucket relies on the first 2 buckets. Is kind of the message there, right? So this third bucket is really, they call it getting strong, and here we have there's more robustness in the team. We see reliability, and we're really creating value. And the 3 subsections here, again, all verified by regression, is the team is accountable. It has good constructive tension. It's able to withstand pressure and give tough feedback and debate, and be okay with healthy conflict. And most importantly, in today's teams, they has to be able to experiment and move at pace and try things out, iterate, right? And you all know about iteration. And go and fail and learn, not over plan, not over analyze, but get moving, right? That's the kind of the key thing. Now, none of those things are possible without a mixture of talent, but also high levels of psychological safety, and also people know what they're doing, right? So that's why that third phase is there, okay? Because as you can see, different forms of behaviors, commitment making, number 3, influencing, taking action without necessarily referral upwards. Agile is a great example of agile teams. Agile really gets it, right? I think that's the brilliant contribution Agile's made to teaming, is this model of not asking permission, being entrusted, being empowered, and just brilliant teaming you see in Agile, right? So anyway, so these things, the research shows, this is the bottom line. The science says you cannot have, it's very rare, I should say, you cannot have, it's very, to have high levels of empowerment, distribution, leadership, high levels of challenging conversations, high levels of calmness and emotional control, high levels of experimentation and taking action, being creativity, without high levels of psychological safety and without being on the same page, right? So that's why these are my 3 buckets, and that's why this is a code. You develop the team in this order, because the root causes of these lie in the first 2 phases. And then the 4th section is simply an outcome. I don't get involved in this. It's just things that pop out. You expect, as a result, profound trust, high delivery, and high adaptation as a result. So there you have the kind of the code where you get set, get safe, get strong, get success. And as you can see, it follows the trust journey, mainly cognitive trust in that get set. Get safe, we start layering in the emotional trust. Get strong, we need both in terms of reliability and the accountability, all the things you build on. And get success, profound trust on the back of those first three. The science supports the journey in trust. The science supports the correlations. And you even get an animation from me. Look at that. And so 27 predictors, 3 phases, 3 subsections within each phase. That's your code. If you want to build a high-performing team, then measure these and develop them in this order is the message. And it's the first code I believe I've come across. I'm open to any other observations, but I've been searching for years and I've never found one that says this is how you build a team in this order with good science. So I'm just conscious of time, 25 minutes. So now I developed this last week, so I'm interested to see how this goes. Right, so I'm going to experiment with this because I've only done this with one other client. In fact, I haven't done it with one client at all. I get one person, not a client. So this is a new territory for me. So I'm kind of living the dream, I suppose. Not living the dream, but I'm kind of modeling the kind of the idea, right, of how. So all this is very well. You're in a team meeting, you're in discussion, you're actually in flow in a team. You're thinking, okay, we want to be clarifying, we want to have good safety, we want to be pushing the agenda. There's an awful lot of things to think about. What do I do? Well, I'm going to tell you a little story and give you a little anagram you can remember to do this, right? So story is the miracle of Isaac, right? So I don't know if anyone here knows the miracle of Isaac, but it's a story from the Bible. It's kind of it's a story of, I say, he loved, commitment, purpose, clarity, vulnerability, and courage. And it's a story that's not, kind of respects with diversity, I suppose, because it's also relevant in Judaism and in Islam. But this story is recognized as kind of very important in all three religions. And even if you're not religious, it's historical. Okay, so it kind of, this isn't a story based upon my belief or my religion. It's a story of history, right? So, so the story goes along these lines, right? Which is that Abraham on the right-hand side was married to Sarah, and he couldn't have. They wanted a child. They couldn't have a child, and at the age of 100, they thought, this is all sort of in the Old Testament, right? So he was given in a miracle. God gave him a child, okay, or gave Sarah a child, and so they didn't conceive. They were given through a miracle Isaac, and they were so pleased and joyous and happy. And then a few years later, God then reappeared to Abraham and said, Abraham, if you really love me and believe me and worship me, then enough, you will sacrifice the most important person, the most incredible thing you've ever had, which is your child, Isaac, and you will sacrifice him for me. And Abraham said, well, I love you so much, and I believe in you so much. And Isaac said, I do as well. I'm prepared to be sacrificed, so we're going to do that. So Abraham took Isaac up to the top of the mountain, lay him on a wreath, as it were, and got out his knife and was just about to chop him up. And God said, Abraham, stop. You've proven that you love me. You don't have to sacrifice Isaac. You've shown me you're committed. You've shown me your courage, etc., and your love. So you can just sacrifice a goat and I'll be happy. So Abraham said, thank goodness for that. Thank God you turned up. I didn't want to lose Isaac. And Isaac then went on to live to 180. And I believe, not knowing particularly exactly what happened, but that was the first book of Genesis in the Bible. I believe that was a kind of a lineage then that ended up with Joseph and Jesus Christ in the Bible, right? And that, or whatever the equivalent was in Judaism and in Islam, he was still a very important moment. Anyway, that's the miracle of Isaac. Now, why am I telling you this story? There is method here. Bear with me. In my work with teams over the last 25 years, and then through the code, these are by far the most obvious skills and behaviors that determine the most effective meetings. Okay, and you'll see these are all relevant to the code, right? So summarizing is a sign of listening and helps people to get clarity. And if they don't summarize correctly, you know, they get corrected. The most important one is questioning. The quick teams ask most questions are most effective. That's an interesting data point. And the questions that really determine effectiveness in a team are questions that get clarity. What do you mean by that? And when can you explain how that would work? And can you what outcome are we trying to create here? And who's going to do this? These are questions of clarification, right? So they're very good. We need to be outcome focused. I won't go through all of this. They're kind of speaking for themselves, right? But they're all drivers of performance, and they all come from the code. Okay. And I thought, okay, they're all things which I give feedback on, and they're right across the code. And if you know, you can get if you buy my book and these things, and you measure these, and these things don't work, you can contact me, and I give you your money back, right? Because these are all absolute brilliant predictors of effective meetings. They help you get on the same page. They help build psychological safety, and they help you move to some kind of conclusion and in good time, right? Now, but how are you going to remember these, right? So, well, I spent a long time, okay, looking at these, thinking, how do you get these things in order to get decisions and outcomes in no time? And if you look carefully at this, there's an anagram, and the anagram reads, don't chop Isaac. So decisions and outcomes in no time is don't, and then don't chop Isaac comes jumping out. Now, it's a pretty clunky anagram. It doesn't say performance or happiness or teaming or IT is king or IT is queen or whatever. But hopefully the story might help you remember, right? Don't chop Isaac, and you can easily, these slides will be available afterwards. You can easily remember these when you're having your meetings. And interestingly, if you look at that quite carefully, as I have done, right? Some interesting stats on this. Don't chop Isaac. 50% of that, these actions, they're all observable. I give feedback. Last week I was doing an offsite with a team in London, and I literally went through what I was watching, and I said, David, you said you asked a question to get clarity. I saw that. Peter, you offered to your assistance. That's a helpfulness. Susan, you cracked a joke that helped to lighten the mood. That was positivity. There's lots of thank yous, etc., etc. I was giving feedback on what I was seeing, and the more that they were doing these things, the more effective they were as a team, and the more they felt that they were really, really flying. Right. So 50% of these things are task, and 50% are process orientated, and you can see that 20% sit in the get set, 50 in the get saved, 30 get strong. So there's a nice blend of the code. Bear in mind the code is all predictive of performance. These are all predictors of performance. So that's my unique, and you can put in the chat whether that works for you. If you think that story is rubbish, or you're not going to remember that, or whatever, then now's your chance to give that feedback. And Simon, you can tell me afterwards, because if it's too hurtful, I'll be too upset. But if it's good, that's fine. Okay, so to conclude, I'll just finish the story of Ed, and we'll come back to Ed and Cho. Okay, why did they succeed then when Ed and Luke didn't? Now, just a quick reminder of these drivers. The reason I put this in the book, the reason Ed actually did my foreword for my book, Ed Stafford wrote the foreword to my book, and I think that the relevance to me is very obvious, right? It may not be so obvious. Well, what's this got to do with IT? What's this got to do with teaming in the modern world? This walk for the Amazon, actually, there's a lot of similarities, right? So, all these areas. So, for example, working with uncertainty. So the whole world of digitalization is about, VUCA, volatile and uncertain, complex, ambiguous, that exactly what they were going through. They didn't know what was going to, you know, the floods were going to do to the terrain. They had no idea how they're going to the villagers were going to react. They had no idea what the drug runners were going to be like when they saw them. Massive amounts of complexity that they were going through. They were also working remote, funnily enough, because they weren't just a team in themselves. They were also having to liaise with London and put their blogs and make sure that their sponsorship and their people that they were communicating to, who were going to hopefully crowdfund them, which they ended up having crowdfunding, were aware of it. So they had this team that they had in London they were engaging with. So they had a virtual team. They had to prepare the compliance and the regulation. They had to be careful about, get their visas and know what villages they were going into, what they couldn't do, what they had to do. There's a lot of compliance and regulation they had to complete. There was isolation and mental health. Ed commented himself that he had depression a little bit when he was out there, tremendously isolated. In happy times, that's their Christmas, right? So the code really applied to them, right? So, and that's what I wanted. That's why it's in the book, because it was relevant to the code. I tested the code against their story, right? And it was quite remarkable. And this is really one of the reasons why Ed was sort of interested in what I was doing, because he looked back at that and he goes, you know what, I can see now why we didn't work out so well. So was there a shared and compatible purpose? Well, Luke wanted to cross the Amazon because he wanted to have a good experience and enjoy some time traveling. And Ed wanted to do it because he wanted to create a career out of it in some way, shape or form, which is what he's done. So they had different purposes. Now, that's okay, provided, of course, you've got different purposes in teams as well, but are they compatible? Well, not really, not this one, because Ed wanted to get across quite quickly. He wanted, not to stay too long in cities, and he wanted to do lots of walking. When Luke appeared, he was overweight, unfit, and he wasn't anywhere near as strong physically as Ed, and so they couldn't do the kind of their purposes got in the way of their objectives and their planning. They didn't really agree their roles in terms of navigation. Ed was doing quite a bit of micromanaging, what they call back navigating. So he was kind of getting in the way of Luke, undermining Luke in terms of his role. They didn't agree how they're going to walk together. So, for example, Ed was adamant that he carry his own sack. Luke was kind of thinking, well, we've got porters. Why would I want to carry my rucksack? Ed was adamant that they would not use donkeys or mules and at all. And Luke was kind of, a little bit more flexible in some situations. So that wasn't agreed. They had no mechanism of giving feedback at all. There was no kind of like, how are we working? Let's have a review of how we're working together or how we're getting on. None of that. There was simmering resentment. And skin in the game is an important driver of team performance. Ed had massive skin in the game because he wanted to do it really fast, really well, because it was his career. Luke had a career in paramedic, funnily enough, lined up, so he wasn't that vested. So they weren't set, okay? And were they safe? Well, maybe as a result of not being set, there was this sort of tension. And certainly Luke wasn't feeling safe. He felt quite vulnerable because, in Ed's own admission, and he's written about, he's quite happy to, and he's been very open about this. He was a bit of he wasn't very nice to Luke. He was quite sort of critical, cynical, and not happy with that. So he didn't sort of say it in a very direct way. He would just undermine him and have little pot shots at him, and that undermined Luke. So there was no asking each other for help. They didn't talk about their emotions or how they were feeling. Humor was cutting, and there was no positive contagion. It was negative contagion, and no empathy at all, and there was no learning. So there was no safety in that team at all, and as a result, they weren't really working effectively together. High levels of conflict. So the tension was not constructive, it was destructive. And they certainly weren't working things out and experimenting together. And as a result, successful? No, because Luke left, he's had enough. And the polar opposite was with Cho. Cho wanted to do this because he wanted a better life for himself. And they worked through these more productive ways. They agreed more explicitly. I think the book will tell you more about the differences. But when I looked at the story and I looked at the code that I created, I felt the story was so compelling. I rewrote a large section of the book. In fact, I pretty much rewrote much of the book to incorporate the story, because I felt it was very accessible and very interesting and very obvious. And that's why the book starts off with the story. So in summary, the teaming landscape is changing for all the reasons I've given. It's different now. It's much more complex. Teams need help. They don't get that help through leadership training, one-to-one training, or psychometrics, or looking back at forming, norming, etc., or going to consultancies. They need something they can self-manage. They need a code, a guide to take them through, and that code is now available. And that's the reason why I've done what I've done. And if you want to know more about the detail I've given you in this short talk, may not feel short for you, it may have felt an eon, but the story, the references, much more detail around how to work, what the science says about working well in digital teams and in virtual teams. I've summarized it here, but the book really goes to town in telling you what you can do there. And a few other things as well. It's all in that book, and you can. I'd ask you as well, if you want to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm unable to connect because we've had quite a few connections, so I'm not able to send out connections as much as I would like. So if you can connect to me, I'm very happy to accept connections. And you can see more stuff on that YouTube channel, and you can pre-order the book on Amazon. It's on Amazon UK, and if you're in the US, you can buy it. It's available in bookstore. I think it's available on Amazon as well. If it's not, it's soon to be available in the US on Amazon. So anyway, that's my story. That's my presentation. Thank you for listening. Hope it was interesting and worth your while. And we've got some time for questions, Simon.
Well, yes, indeed. Thank you so much, George. I'm definitely going to wait for the video to come out so that I can try and digest all of that. And fortunately, George will be sharing the slides with us and with yourselves in due course, so you'll be able to remember the bullet points without having to remember the cute ways to memorize the sequence of all of the bullet points. We have got around 10 minutes left for any comments, observations, questions. We're delighted to hear from you, anything that you'd like to explore more. We're also very, very happy for you to turn on your camera and actually express your question or observation directly to us. While you're just thinking about that, I see that there was a question already in chat from Christian, which is, was the route based on Ed having a greater level of cognitive trust in Cho, i.e. he believed he could do it more than Luke, as he had an existing relationship with Luke?
It's a really good question. Ed, I asked that question. Ed trusted Luke, and Luke actually had some more skills. He was a better, what did Ed say? He was not better navigator, but he had better rope skills, right? Better rope skills, better practical skills. So Ed had good trust in Luke's competence to do the job of expedition and exploration, but where the cognitive trust wasn't just about competence, as you can see right on that get set, it wasn't just about can he do it. It's does he have the same idea of why we're doing it, what's at stake, what his role is, and that was eroded over time quite quickly. And Cho, he had cognitive trust because he had the same sort of motivations, and so the cognitive trust in Cho was there early on, but it wasn't because have anything to do with friendship. It was just there.
The thought I had earlier, George, is this whole question of feeling safe in your team. Of course, whilst you're thinking that that's a good thing, safety to me might mean actually trying to avoid anything that's challenging or difficult and sort of sticking to safe ground. So the pursuit of safety isn't necessarily going to take the team in the right direction. It's got to be the right kind of objective behind the safety, I suspect.
Well, there's two types of safety, right? So there's kind of, are we trying to be safe, which is risk aversion? Okay, so that's the antipathy of, that's why the code, in a strong sense, encourages experimentation and balanced risk taking. But the other, of course, which I think what you're alluding to, is the fact you can have too much safety without the strong stuff. You end up with this thing called group think. Everyone is kind of so aligned and so lovely and warm that they cease to see the emperor's clothes, right? And so yeah, that's why that third phase is so important. So important that you have that challenge and that you bring that in. And that's why safety, the second phase on its own, is not enough. It's a launch pad for using that safety. There was another question there that popped up. I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question from Kat, which is what do you do with an existing team where the team members don't have confidence in each other's ability to perform and deliver?
Well, I can only take my I can only sympathise, because that is a recipe for disaster. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be negative, but if you don't believe in the competence of the team, then that's a very, very unpleasant place to be, because the team construction is not the right construction. And therefore, you're kind of stuck with that. So I'm sorry, but that's going to cause the team to be, you've got to buckle up for that and kind of somehow stay sane. The one thing I might say to offer a kind of shred of hope, I suppose, is that we have to be objective with the reality. In other words, it's not going back to the mantra, control what you can control and influence what you can, and don't sweat what you can't. In other words, you've got the core ingredients. Your job as a team member to help you stay sane is, how do I make the best out of this situation? You can't change, it's not your job to change them. You might even be a team leader, you can't change it because you haven't got the budget to do that or whatever. So you have to accept that reality. Accept the reality is the way to keep sane, and do what you can to maximize that. And that's probably the only thing I can say to help you stay sane.
As a follow-up, George, in a team like that, can we do anything on the part of get set? So get further alignment with get everybody in the team in the same page. So if what's happening is that people don't trust in each other's competence, do we want to pair them to see how competent is each other, and at least they know how competent they are? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think it's a very good point, because a lot of the time, okay, so I don't know. So I imagine a lot of things about other people in my team. I don't know. I imagine, right? I have my interpretation, and that might be based on limited information or inaccurate, or those people's competencies might be not a result of their incompetence, but the expectations they've been set by somebody else, or they haven't been equipped to perform, or their roles aren't clear, right? So go back to that set. So that's a really good point. Go back to that setting, make sure with the ingredients that you've got, you're getting those shared understanding, and then you'll get the best out of the situation. Are we clear on, let's put all those possible drivers of poor performance to the test and get on that same page is the way forward to mitigate that. There was another question I saw at pop. It's a really good question. I can't remember what it was.
There are several very good questions which we can go to. I noticed though that Christian has his camera on. Christian, did you have an observation or a question for us?
No, not at all. It was really just a thank you for the conversation. It's been a fantastic evening. And thank you for answering my previous question around the relationship. It's just a fascinating subject around I guess that bias that you bring in with sort of that implicit trust that you might have with somebody that you hold a existing relationship, and how much that can actually sort of I use old phraseology, but cloud your judgment, if you like, in terms of making those sort of unbiased decisions going forwards. And with my background in search and rescue, obviously very familiar with life and death situations, having to react, make decisions very, very quickly. Sometimes you don't know the people you're working with, but often I've found, like on the cliff top, in an operations room environment, for example, actually the people I don't know are the people that I've tended to work better with, and that's just really fascinating because I know their credentials, I know where they've come from, I know what organisations trained them, for example. Whereas my oppos, my colleagues, if you like, I'm not saying that there was more sort of hand-holding needed, or whether I felt that unconsciously, but certainly I felt I performed a lot better with those people I don't necessarily have an existing relationship with. It sounds a bit perverse, but it makes a lot of sense having heard you tonight.
I mean, that's great to hear. I mean, that's kind of validates it, isn't it, really, the importance of where you get your trust from, right? You initially, especially under pressure, time pressure, it's around those that swift trust, that competence, and being on the same page. There was another great question as well.
Let me just run through all the great. There's lots of great questions. Is the problem? Let me run through what people have said, and George, I'll leave you to pick up any themes in it. But I mean, to some extent, they're observations or suggestions rather than just questions. Firstly, do you think someone may feel less safe because of outside pressures, financial pressures, being an earner?
The answer is yes, definitely, 100%, undoubtedly, because it sends the emotions into a more anxious place. Therefore, we become less grounded, less calm, and therefore we're more likely to be unsafe, for sure. No doubt about that.
There's a suggestion of doing a root cause analysis and perform a motivational lift up based on each member's personal traits, which sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, the more you get to know people, the better. I mean, definitely getting to understand what drives people, what their motivations are, for sure. Yeah.
And Ian is saying to have team objectives rather than individual objectives.
Oh, no, that's massive. I didn't emphasize that enough. The most important question I ask and work within the team is, do you know where your shared goals are? I kind of skimmed over that, but that's the most important question. Team needs to know where it needs a team and where it's individual sport. And so knowing where your shared goals are, that's where you have to be teaming. And that's why skin in the game is, because if you've got shared goals and you're invested in those in some way, shape or form, as in you're rewarded to perform for the team goal, you're going to get motivation to work collaboratively on the back of that. So yes, brilliant.
There's a question here which I've got an answer to. I'll let George have an answer to it as well. Ian wants to know if there's an optimum size for a team, and I personally have developed a mathematical proof of what the answer is.
Well, we could test each other. I'd be interested in the answer is, I've looked at this as well. There isn't a consensus. There is a few sort of generalizations people are moving towards, but 4 seems to be the most optimum number that I have found in my research.
Pretty close.
And so certainly below 6, and then so maybe what have you got? 5,
3.
6?
No, 3.
3. Okay, all right. Well,
it's what the result of considering the complexity that's generated by having multiple players in a team against the fact that you've got more resource in the team. So the team gets bigger and bigger, it's got more and more resource, but the team's effectiveness gets harder and harder because of all of the interplay between all the different elements of the team.
So in a team of 3, you have 3 relationships. In a team of 10, you have 45 relationships, right? So the summation of those creates the team. So yes, there's much more complexity the bigger the team. And unfortunately, a lot of teams are too big, 12 to 15, 16. They're there because I don't know why they don't want to put people out because their egos are too big. They don't want to be not part of the team, right? That's sometimes the bottom line, especially in these bigger teams, more senior teams. But yes, smaller teams are better. Once you get past 10, you get performance loss, 10 to 12 especially. Ideally, 4 to 8 is a safe number. That's what the research tends to say. 3, I don't doubt that, actually. I think for the reasons you've given. But for some reason, the research is saying 4 to 8.
Yeah, in fact, I've run a lot of training exercises where you generate teams for the course of a training course, and they play as if they're a real team. And it's interesting that you do get to a stage in that context where the team breaks apart, and it basically falls into 2 teams because the 6 people really can't actually operate effectively as a team and they sort of instinctively break into a 4 and a 2 or 2 3s. Anyway, there really are a lot of great questions. We haven't touched on all of them there. Sadly, we really don't have the time to carry on any longer. It's been fascinating. And so big thanks to George, big thanks to everybody else who's contributed. Excellent this evening, George. I think fantastic, mind-boggling as well. So I am going to go and look at the slides again and look at the video before I feel I've done it full justice and digested everything.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for your questions and your interest. I could feel the the attention there. It's lovely to see at the end. I'm very pleased. Thank you very much.
That's great. Well, everybody, that's it for today. Thank you very much.